The warehouse always smelled the same, a mix of cold metal, solvent, and old, dusty concrete. Lena moved through it with a quiet rhythm that was its own kind of silence. Her world was one of meticulous order: the disassembly, the cleaning, the inspection, the reassembly. Row upon row of rifles, pistols, and machine guns awaited her attention on the long steel tables. She was a civilian contractor, a ghost in the vast machinery of the military's logistics wing. To the soldiers who occasionally drifted in to collect or drop off gear, she was just a quiet woman with the careful hands, her head perpetually bent over her work, her voice rarely heard. Her past was a closed book, one she kept tightly locked. The soldiers saw a small woman in her late 30s, with faint lines around her eyes that spoke of age, not laughter, and hands that were strangely graceful yet strong. They didn't see the years that had shaped those hands. They didn't know about the farm in the valley, the long, open fields, the father who had been more of a mountain than a man, a hunter who had taught his daughter to read the wind before she could read books. They didn't know about the championship trophies, now packed away in a storage unit in another state, or the deafening silence of a life that had veered sharply off its intended path. She was polishing the bolt of a standard-issue sniper rifle when the main door clanged open, breaking the warehouse's muted hum. The air changed, charged with a different energy. Two men walked in, but one commanded the space. He moved with a loose-limbed, efficient grace, his eyes scanning the room not with curiosity, but with assessment. This was Sergeant Cale Morrow. His reputation preceded him like a shadow, a legend in the Special Forces community, a sniper whose confirmed long-distance shots were spoken of in low, respectful tones in briefing rooms. He was accompanied by a younger, nervous-looking armorer who was carrying a long, heavy case. The armorer, Jenkins, approached Lena's station. "Need this prepped for a deep-range calibration test tomorrow," he said, hefting the case onto the table. "Sergeant Morrow's personal system." Lena merely nodded, unlocking the case. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, lay a rifle that was a piece of art in its lethality. It was a massive bolt-action platform, fitted with a scope that looked more like a small telescope. The metal was matte black, free of any serial numbers or unit markings that weren't essential. This was a tool built for one purpose, at the very edge of possibility. She began her usual process, her movements reverent and precise. She was aware of Morrow's presence as he leaned against a table a few feet away, watching her, not with suspicion, but with an intense, focused interest. As she methodically broke down the rifle, cleaning each component with a ritualistic care, Morrow finally spoke. His voice was low, a gravelly baritone that fit his worn appearance. "You handle that like you know it." Lena didn't look up. "It's my job, Sergeant. Most armorers treat it like a machine. You're treating it like a violin." She remained silent, running a patch through the pristine barrel. He pushed off the table and took a step closer. Jenkins had drifted away, busy with paperwork. "That scope," Morrow said, pointing to the sophisticated sight. "It's zeroed for an extreme range. Further than the manual says this cartridge can go." He paused, letting the implication hang. "It requires a particular touch, a feel for the bullet's life, all the way downrange." Lena finally glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I've read the ballistic tables." Morrow gave a short, quiet laugh that wasn't unkind. "Tables don't tell the whole story. They don't tell you about the last 100 meters where the bullet is basically asleep, just hoping it falls on the right spot." He studied her, his gaze missing nothing. The way her fingers didn't fumble with the tiny screws, the exact torque she applied to the scope rings, the subconscious way she checked the level. "You've shot before. Competitively. Long range." It wasn't really a question. A flicker of something, alarm, memory, passed behind Lena's eyes before she shuddered it. "A long time ago, Sergeant." "Why'd you stop?" The question, so direct, hung in the air between them. The sounds of the warehouse seemed to recede. Lena focused on reassembling the rifle, the clicks and slides of metal into metal, her only answer for a long moment. "Life happened," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a conversation under a wall built with 4 simple words. But Morrow didn't walk away. He watched her seat the bolt back into the receiver, her movement fluid and sure. He saw something, a ghost of muscle memory, a total lack of hesitation. He had worked with the best shooters in the world. He recognized the echo of one. Just as she was closing the case, he asked the question. It was delivered in the same casual, low tone, but its weight was immense. Given a perfect setup, no wind, a known target, could you hit 3,800 meters with this? Lena's hands froze on the clasps of the case. The number seemed to vibrate in the cool air. 3,800 meters. Over 2 miles. It was a distance spoken of in myth, a barrier only a handful of people on the planet had ever touched. It wasn't just shooting, it was a complex act of faith, physics, and intuition. She looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time fully. In his weathered face, she saw no mockery, no challenge meant to belittle. She saw genuine, professional curiosity. He was asking her, the quiet cleaner of weapons, a question he might ask a fellow master of the craft. The old self, the girl from the farm who could thread a bullet through a whisper, stirred inside her. It was a self buried under years of grief, of running, of quiet anonymity. Her throat felt tight. The automatic denial, the of course not, died before it reached her lips. The truth, a truth she had not acknowledged to anyone, least of all herself, fought its way to the surface. Her reply, when it came, was as quiet as the rest of her, but it held a core of solid steel. I don't know, Lena said, holding his gaze. But I know how to listen for the answer. The silence that followed her words was thicker than the warehouse dust. Sergeant Morrow simply nodded, as if she'd confirmed a private hypothesis. He didn't smile, didn't offer praise or skepticism. He just took the case from the table, his eyes still on her. Be at the high-angle test range at 0500 tomorrow, he said, his tone now one of clear instruction. The one out past the salt flats. Jenkins will bring you. Before she could formulate a response, protest, question, anything, he was walking away, the echo of his boots fading into the hum of the ventilation system. Lena stood rooted to the spot, the smell of solvent suddenly sharp in her nostrils. What had she just done? The comfortable, invisible cocoon of her routine had been torn open. The thought of being on a range again with a rifle like that, in front of a man like that, sent a cold tremor through her that was part terror, part a terrifying thrill she hadn't felt in over a decade. That night, her small, sparse apartment offered no comfort. The ghost of her father seemed to sit in the empty chair across from her. He had been her first and only coach, a man of few words who spoke the language of wind and trajectory fluently. She could almost hear his voice. The rifle is just the pointer, girl. The bullet has its own life. You just have to set on the right path and let it live. She thought of the trophies, the travel, the bright future that had been ahead of her. Then she thought of the phone call, the car accident on a rainy road, the crushing responsibility of a family farm suddenly, drowning in debt, and the slow, painful death of a dream. She had sold the farm, paid the debts, and walked away from everything, including the person she used to be. At 0430, in the pre-dawn darkness, Jenkins picked her up in a military jeep. He was uncharacteristically silent, shooting her sideways glances filled with a mix of awe and concern. You know he doesn't do this, right? Jenkins finally blurted out as the city lights faded behind them, replaced by the vast, moonlit emptiness of the salt flats. Invite civilians to something like this. This isn't a qualification test. This is him chasing a ghost. A ghost? Lena asked, her voice sounding small against the roar of the engine. A record. A theoretical limit. He's been chasing 4,000 meters for 2 years. He's hit 3,750. That last 50, it's a wall. He says the equipment is ready, but the conditions and the shooter have to be perfect. In sync. Jenkins shook his head. And now he's got you. The range was not like any Lena had ever seen. It was a vast, barren stretch of hard-packed earth and salt, leading to a series of low, distant hills. A sophisticated, permanent firing point was set up, a solid concrete bench under a shaded canopy, surrounded by meteorological equipment, communication gear, and spotting scopes on heavy tripods. Morrow was already there, a solitary figure checking a laptop screen that displayed data from downrange weather stations. The sunrise began to paint the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Morrow acknowledged her with a chin lift. "We have a 3-hour window. Wind is forecast to be under 2 miles per hour, rising after that. Atmosphere is stable." He pointed to a massive target set up over 3 kilometers away, barely visible as a speck even through the high-powered spotting scope. "That's the 3,000-meter marker. We'll work up to it. Today is about seeing if the rifle and the shooter are speaking the same language." He opened the case. "This is not your competition rifle. This is a .416 Barrett. The round weighs over 400 grains. At these distances, you're not aiming at a target. You're aiming at a zip code. Coriolis effect, spin drift, atmospheric pressure. They're not factors here. They're the main characters." He guided her through the system. The adjustable stock, the custom trigger set to a whisper light break, the complex reticule of the scope that allowed for milliradian adjustments finer than a human hair. Lena's first shots at 1,000 meters were a process of relearning. Her body remembered the fundamentals, breath control, natural point of aim, focus, but everything about the rifle was more powerful, more precise, more alive with vibration and sound. Morrow, acting as spotter, called her corrections in a calm, technical monotone. "Right 2/10, down .1. She adjusted, fired. The hit was confirmed. As they pushed further, 1,500, then 2,000 meters, something began to shift. The analytical part of her mind, the part that calculated and worried, began to quiet. The older, deeper part, the one that felt the shot before she took it, began to awaken. It was like remembering a melody she had forbidden herself to sing. Morrow noticed. His instructions became fewer. At 2,500 meters, he simply said, "Tell me what you need." She lay behind the rifle, her cheek resting against the stock, her eye to the scope. The world narrowed to the circular view, the mirage waves shimmering off the distant earth. She could feel the slight, almost imperceptible push of the air current moving from right to left. She could see the heat haze beginning to rise. She didn't just calculate, she absorbed. She dialed the elevation turret, then added a tiny fraction more, intuitively accounting for the bullet's slowing arc. She nudged the windage. "Send it," Morrow murmured. She exhaled, stilled, and broke the trigger. The report was a colossal, flat crack that rolled out over the desert. The wait for the impact was an eternity. Then, through his high-powered spotting scope, Morrow saw a tiny puff of dust, just a foot left of the target center. "It," he said. A long pause. "You held for wind I didn't give you." Lena finally sat back, her shoulder aching from the recoil, her heart pounding. It was coming. In 3 seconds. You could see it in the mirage pattern on the low scrub, halfway down. Morrow looked from the scope to her, his expression unreadable. For the first time, she saw a crack in his professional armor. It was respect, raw and undiluted. He hadn't brought her here on a whim. He had seen a spark, and now it was a flame. "We break," he said. "Then we try for 3,200. As they sat in the shade, drinking warm water, the distance between them was no longer one of rank or mystery. It was the space between two people who understood a singular, rare language. He didn't ask about her past again. Instead, he talked about the shot, the one at 3,750 meters. The bullet was in the air for almost 9 seconds. You have to lead a man walking, even at that range. It's not mathematics anymore. It's prophecy. Lena looked out at the shimmering distance. The fear was gone, burned away by the focus. In its place was a hungry, pulling curiosity. A question had been asked of her. Could she hit 3,800? She had spent a lifetime running from the person who could answer. Now, for the first time, she wanted to find her. The next week passed in a blurred duality for Lena. Her days in the warehouse were the same, yet everything was different. The weapons she cleaned were no longer just inanimate objects. She felt their potential, their balance, their individual souls in her hands. The soldiers who came and when were no longer just uniforms. She now understood the profound relationship they had with their tools, a relationship she was unexpectedly rekindling. Her evenings and pre-dawn hours belonged to Sergeant Morrow and the Salt Flats. It was an unspoken, intense collaboration. They never spoke of her official duties or his missions. Their world existed solely between the firing line and the distant, shrinking targets. They pushed to 3,400 meters, then 3,500. Each session was a brutal lesson in humility. The margin for error vanished. A heartbeat, a micron of misjudgment in the mirage, a 1-mile-per-hour wind gust that didn't register on the sensors until it was too late. Any of it could mean a clean miss. Morrow was a demanding but fair partner. He shared data, theories, and hard-won experience freely. He taught her to read the advanced atmospheric displays, but more importantly, he encouraged her to trust the instinct she was rediscovering. "The computer gives you the address," he said one morning after a frustrating string of misses at 3,600 meters. "But your gut, your eye that gives you the key to the front door. You have to use both." Lena found herself changing. The perpetual slouch of someone trying to be unseen began to straighten. The guarded light in her eyes sharpened into focus. She started eating better, sleeping more deeply, her body preparing for a task it now craved. The ghost of her former self wasn't just stirring. It was stepping into the light, merging with the woman she had become. The breakthrough came on a morning so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. They were attempting 3,700 meters. The target was a life-size silhouette of a man, a mere sliver on the horizon. Lena had gone through her ritual, settling into the rifle, merging her body with the bipod and rear bag, slowing her breath until she was almost in a meditative state. She dialed in the enormous elevation, over 120 feet of bullet drop. The wind call was minimal, but the air felt heavy, dense. She fired. The wait was agonizing. Nearly 8 seconds of silence stretched out, filled only with the ringing in their ears from the muzzle blast. Through his scope, Morrow saw nothing. No impact puff. "Miss," he said, his voice flat with disappointment. But Lena didn't move. She stayed glued to her scope, her finger off the trigger. "Again," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Lena, there's no again. The same hold. Now." Something in her tone made him pause. He nodded. She cycled the bolt, loaded another round, settled back into the exact same position. She didn't adjust a single click. She took the same breath, found the same point of focus, and broke the trigger. Another eternity passed. Then, on the distant hillside, a small, distinct puff of gray dust appeared, right at the base of the silhouette target. "Hit low center mass," Morrow announced, confusion and dawning realization in his voice. "But the first shot hit too," Lena said, finally sitting back. She looked at him, her eyes clear. "The air is thicker today. Humid. The bullet is losing speed faster. My first shot was a correction for the second. I felt it. The first one sailed long, didn't it? By maybe 2 meters. Morrow checked the data log from the downrange acoustic target sensor. His eyes widened. The sensor had indeed registered an impact 2 meters past the target, a hit he'd missed because he was looking at the target itself. She had felt the subtle ballistic difference, trusted it, and sent a second identical round to compensate, achieving a perfect hit. This wasn't just shooting. This was a dialogue with physics. He looked at her, and, for the first time, she saw something like wonder on his seasoned face. "You're not just a shooter, Lena," he said. "You're a natural, a true natural. Tomorrow, we go for 3,800. That night, the past came flooding back, not as a haunting, but as a chorus. She took out the old, sealed box from the top of her closet. Inside, wrapped in felt, was her last competition medal. Beneath it were photographs. A younger, smiling Lena on a podium. Her father, his big hand on her shoulder, his pride silent but palpable. the wide-open fields of the farm. She didn't feel the old, sharp grief. Instead, she felt a connection, a lineage. Her father hadn't just taught her to shoot. He had taught her to see, to feel, to be patient. He had given her this language, and for years, she had chosen to be mute. No longer. The next morning, as they drove to the range, the atmosphere was charged with a silent gravity. The equipment was checked and rechecked. The target, a large steel plate, was placed at the precisely surveyed distance of 3,800 meters. It was so far it was below the curvature of the Earth, requiring them to aim upwards on an arc. The conditions were good, but not perfect. A faint, inconsistent breeze teased the edges of the range flags. Morrow laid it out. This is the edge of the map. Everything we've done is preamble. This round will be in the air for almost 9 seconds. It will be subsonic for the last 1,000 meters, tumbling, unstable. It's a lottery ticket, but you have to buy it with perfect technique. Lena nodded. She felt a profound calm. This wasn't about proving anything to Morrow, or to the army, or even to herself. It was about answering the question honestly. It was about completing the sentence that had been left hanging a lifetime ago. She got into position. The world shrank. The warehouse, her past, her fears, all dissolved. There was only the feel of the stock, the circle of the scope, the distant, glinting speck of steel, and the invisible, chaotic highway of air between them. She dialed the final adjustments, her hands steady. She heard Morrow's final wind call, saw the data on the screen, and then let it all fade into background noise. She listened to the slight pressure on her cheek, to the shimmer in the scope, to the memory in her bones. She took a final, shallow breath, let half of it out, and held perfectly still. In the stillness, she saw not a target, but a destination. She saw the bullet's life, from ignition to impact. Her finger took up the last gram of pressure. The rifle roared, its violent kick a distant, irrelevant sensation. The wait began. 1 second. 2. The bullet was flying, a small piece of metal on an impossible journey. 7. 8. And then, through the powerful spotting scope, Sergeant Cale Morrow saw a tiny, brilliant flash of light on the distant hillside, followed by the faint, delayed sound of a clang rolling back across the desert like a distant church bell. He didn't say anything. He just lowered the scope and looked at the woman lying prone on the mat, her eyes still to the rifle, waiting for confirmation. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the first she had ever seen from him. He didn't need to speak. The answer was in the quiet desert air. The echo of the shot seemed to linger in the vastness long after the steel target had stopped ringing. Lena finally sat up, her body trembling not from recoil, but from a deep, cellular release of tension. She looked at Morrow, her face a question mark. He simply nodded, once a definitive, solid gesture. The ghost of a smile touched her own lips, then faded into something more profound, a quiet, settled peace. The drive back was silent, but it was a comfortable, shared silence. The Jeep bounced over the rough track, the early sun now warm on their faces. Jenkins, who had witnessed the shot from a monitoring station, was buzzing with suppressed excitement, but a look from Morrow kept him quiet. This moment wasn't for chatter or celebration. It was something sacred, a private summit that had been reached. Back at the warehouse, the routine awaited. Lena changed into her work coveralls, the smell of solvent and grease replacing the scent of desert sage and gunpowder. She picked up a standard issue M4 carbine and began the familiar process. But her hands were different now. They moved with the same efficiency, but there was a new authority in her touch, a deeper understanding. She was no longer just maintaining tools. She was communing with their purpose. Morrow appeared at the doorway an hour later. He wasn't in his combat gear, but in a standard duty uniform. He carried a folded piece of paper. "My report on the range tests," he said, placing it on the table beside her. "It says the rifle system performed to specification at extreme distance. It doesn't mention your name in the context of the final shot." Lena looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because that's your story to tell. Or not tell, he said, his voice low. What you did out there, it belongs to you. The army doesn't need to own it. But I needed to see it. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I have a proposal. Not an order. A request. He explained that his unit had a permanent spot for a high-level civilian weapons specialist. Not just an armorer, but someone who could deep dive into the weapons systems, troubleshoot issues in the field based on feel and performance, and, yes, occasionally help train their snipers in the more intuitive aspects of long-range craft. It was a job that required a rare blend of technical knowledge and innate, almost artistic understanding. The person who held the job retired 6 months ago. We haven't found a replacement. We've been looking for a unicorn, Morrow said, his eyes steady on hers. Turns out, she was quietly cleaning weapons in a warehouse. Lena felt the ground shift under her feet again. This was a door swinging open to a world she had never imagined being part of. The tip of the spear, the quiet professionals who operated in the shadows. It was terrifying. It was also a chance to use her gift, not as a forgotten relic of her past, but as a living, breathing part of her present. I'm not a soldier, she said softly. Good. We have plenty of those, Morrow replied. We need someone who speaks the weapons language as her first language. Think about it. He left her with a folded report and the echoing silence of the warehouse. For the rest of the day, Lena moved through her tasks in a thoughtful daze. The ghosts of her past were no longer chasing her. They were standing beside her, nodding in approval. Her father's stern, proud face. Her younger self, fierce and focused on a target. They were not burdens. They were foundations. That evening, she didn't go straight home. She drove to a nearby park, to a quiet spot overlooking a lake. She took out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. An old family friend, the one who had helped her settle her father's affairs. Annie? It's Lena. Yes, it's been too long. Listen, I was wondering, do you know if anyone ever bought the old strip of land behind the North Field? The high ground. She talked for a while about nothing and everything. She didn't mention the shot, or Morrow, or the job. But she asked about the land, the view, the way the wind came across it. She was reconnecting with a piece of herself, not to go back, but to bring a part of it forward. A week later, Lena stood in front of a small, attentive audience in a closed briefing room. It was Morrow's unit, a dozen men and women with sharp eyes and calm demeanors. Morrow introduced her simply as their new civilian weapons systems consultant. There were curious glances, but no open skepticism. They trusted their sergeant. Lena's first presentation was on barrel harmonics and how subtle changes in cleaning technique or mounting pressure could affect a precision rifle's point of impact at extreme range. She spoke clearly, without jargon, using analogies from her old life, the tension in a guitar string, the flow of water around a stone. She saw nods of understanding, a few scribbled notes. Afterwards, a young sniper, a corporal with a confident air, approached her. Sergeant Morrow says you have a feel for the long shot. We've been struggling with consistent hits on a moving target simulation at about 2,800 meters. The math checks out, but we're missing. Lena thought for a moment. Are you leading based on his walking speed, or based on the rhythm of his walk? She asked. A man doesn't move at a constant velocity. He dips, he sways. At that distance, you're not leading a man. You're leading his shadow, 2 seconds in the future. You have to feel the rhythm. The corporal blinked. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. The rhythm, he repeated. Okay, yeah, I want to try that. As he walked away, Morrow came to stand beside her, watching his team absorb the new perspective. See, he said quietly. First language. Lena smiled, a real, unguarded smile that lit up her face. She was no longer the woman hiding in the warehouse. She was the woman who had answered a question at 3,800 meters, and in doing so had found a whole new set of questions to ask. Her future was no longer a quiet, colorless line. It was a horizon, vast and clear, waiting for her to read the wind.